CEO's paralyzed daughter sat alone at her birthday cake, until a single dad said, "Can we join you?" Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to today's main character. At the top floor of St. Mary's Hospital, a lonely tune of a piano echoed faintly through the hallway. Balloons in soft pink and white floated near the ceiling, tied to a chair where a little girl sat in silence. Her name was Sophie Cole, 8 years old. Paralyzed from the waist down after the car accident that had taken her mother's life 2 years ago. Before her sat a birthday cake glowing with 8 small candles. The frosting was perfect, the decorations delicate, but no one had touched it. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the passing seconds of a celebration that never began. Around her, nurses whispered, unsure if they should sing. Sophie looked at the door, hoping. Her father, Alexander Cole, the chief executive officer of Cole Medical Holdings, was on a business call in the next room. His voice was calm, controlled, and cold. To the world, he was a man who saved hospitals. To his daughter, he was a shadow moving between meetings. Sophie tried to smile. "Maybe he will come after the call," she whispered, though her voice trembled. The candles flickered, the wax beginning to drip. She closed her eyes and made a wish she no longer believed in. The double doors opened, and a man stepped in, not wearing a suit, not part of the hospital staff. His shirt was wrinkled from work, his hair damp from the drizzle outside. Beside him, a boy about 6 years old clutched a small paper box tied with a ribbon. They had taken the wrong elevator. "I am so sorry," the man said, his tone gentle but awkward. "We were looking for the pediatric ward." Sophie blinked at them, surprised. The boy looked at her cake and then at his father. "Dad," he whispered, "she looks lonely." Alexander's assistant moved quickly, ready to escort the strangers out, but before anyone could stop him, the man knelt beside Sophie's wheelchair. His voice was quiet, respectful. "Hey there, birthday girl. This looks like a beautiful cake. Mind if we join you for a minute?" The room went still. The nurses exchanged glances, unsure what to do. Sophie stared at him, then at the boy holding the box. Her voice came out as a small whisper. "Can I see what is inside?" The boy nodded shyly and opened it. Inside was a cupcake, slightly crushed but bright with blue frosting. "It is not as big as yours," he said, "but my dad says every candle deserves a wish." Sophie smiled for the first time that day. The man Ethan Miller smiled back. He helped his son light the tiny candle. Together, they began to sing softly, their voices filling the quiet room with a warmth no chandelier could create. In the doorway, Alexander paused, phone still pressed to his ear. The sound reached him gentle, human, unplanned. He ended the call without a word. For a long moment, he simply watched as his daughter laughed, a sound he had almost forgotten. Sophie looked up and waved at her father. "Dad, they are helping me celebrate," she said brightly. "Can they stay?" Alexander hesitated. The stranger met his eyes with an honest smile. "We will not stay long," Ethan said. "Just long enough for her to make her wish." Alexander nodded once, the wall around him cracking in silence. Sophie closed her eyes again, candlelight dancing across her face. This time, her wish was different. She wished the moment would not end. Outside the hospital window, the rain began to fall soft, cleansing, and full of promise. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the glass walls of St. Mary's Hospital. The party decorations had been cleared away, but one balloon, pale pink and half deflated, still floated above Sophie's bed. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air. Sophie was sketching in a small notebook, drawing a paper windmill like the one Liam had shown her. Her hand trembled slightly, but there was light in her eyes again. For the first time in months, she hummed while she drew. Outside the room, Alexander Cole stood beside Dr. Harris, the chief physician of the hospital. The doctor's tone was careful, professional. "Physically, she is stable," he said. "But she has lost the will to engage. That little boy yesterday," he made her laugh. "That means something." Alexander nodded stiffly, his gaze fixed on his daughter through the window. "It will not happen again," he said quietly. "It is not safe for patients to interact with strangers." Dr. Harris sighed but did not argue. "Sir, healing is not only about medicine, it is about connection." Alexander turned away, his expression unreadable. For years, guilt had built a wall inside him. Guilt for driving that night. Guilt for surviving when his wife did not. He worked 16-hour days trying to save other lives, but he had forgotten how to save his own child's heart. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Miller was tightening a bolt on a customer's car at his small repair shop. The morning news played softly from a radio. He looked tired but calm, his hands steady, his focus sharp. Liam sat in a corner with a coloring book, drawing balloons and candles. "Dad," the boy said suddenly, "do you think Sophie liked the cupcake?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I think she did, buddy. Maybe we made her day a little better." He did not tell his son that part of him could not stop thinking about the little girl's eyes, or the way her father had looked powerful, distant, trapped in his own armor. Later that afternoon, a black car stopped outside Ethan's shop. Alexander stepped out, still wearing his tailored suit, his presence commanding. Ethan wiped his hands and came forward, cautious but polite. "Mr. Cole, right?" he asked. "Is Sophie all right?" Alexander studied him for a moment before answering. "My daughter spoke highly of you and your son," he said. She would like to see you again." Ethan blinked in surprise. "Really?" "Yes. She asked for you this morning. I believe your presence could help her recovery. I would like to make an arrangement." Ethan hesitated. "I do not want charity, Mr. Cole." "This is not charity," Alexander replied. "It is employment. You would assist the rehabilitation team. Nothing more." The tone was formal, but beneath it there was a flicker of something human. Ethan looked at his son, then back at the man. "If it helps her, I will do it." Alexander gave a short nod. "We begin tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. That night, Ethan told Liam the news. The boy's eyes brightened. "We get to see Sophie again?" "Yes, but it is not a play date. It is work. We will be helping her with her exercises." Liam grinned. "Then we will help her smile too." The next day, the hospital felt different. Sophie was waiting in the therapy room, her wheelchair parked beside a window filled with morning light. She looked up as they entered, her smile immediate and real. "You came back," she said softly. Ethan knelt beside her, meeting her eye level. "Of course. We promised, remember?" Liam held out a paper windmill, freshly colored blue. "For you," he said proudly. "It spins if you blow on it." "Oh." Sophie laughed, a sound clear and bright, and for a moment, even Alexander, standing in the doorway, felt his heart loosen. Dr. Harris watched the three of them from across the hall and murmured to a nurse, "That is what medicine cannot buy." As the morning light poured in, the hospital no longer felt sterile. It felt alive, with the faint sound of laughter, the turning of a small paper windmill, and the first fragile signs of healing for a family that had forgotten how to be one. Days turned into weeks at St. Mary's Hospital, and a quiet rhythm began to take shape. Every morning, Ethan and his son arrived promptly at 9 o'clock. Liam would bring a new drawing or a small toy, and Sophie would wait for them near the window with her sketchbook open. Her laughter started to echo faintly through the sterile corridors where silence had once ruled. Ethan was not a doctor, but his way of helping came from instinct. He turned therapy into play. He rolled tennis balls across the floor and had Sophie catch them, cheering every small movement of her hands. He built a ramp from cardboard so she could practice moving her wheelchair without fear. When she grew frustrated, he told her softly, "You do not have to be perfect. You just have to keep trying." Dr. Harris watched from the observation room and smiled. "She is responding better than to any medical program we have tried," he told Alexander. But Alexander stood with his arms crossed, torn between gratitude and caution. He did not like how easily this mechanic and his boy had stepped into their lives. One afternoon, after the session ended, Sophie asked Ethan, "Did your wife help you with cars too?" Ethan froze for a second. "No," he said gently. "She used to sing while I worked. The shop felt warmer when she was there." Sophie nodded as if she understood. "My mom used to sing too. I do not remember all the words, but I remember the sound." When Alexander came in that evening, he found his daughter asleep with a faint smile on her face. In her hands was the blue paper windmill Liam had made. For the first time, Alexander felt a quiet peace inside the hospital room that had haunted him for 2 years. But peace never lasts long for a man who carries guilt. Later that night, Alexander sat alone in his office, staring at the photograph of his late wife. The car accident replayed in his mind like a film he could never stop. He had been behind the wheel. One flash of rain, one wrong turn, and everything had changed. Sophie's paralysis was the scar of his failure. The next morning, Sophie's progress impressed everyone. She managed to lift her legs an inch higher, her muscles trembling but alive. Ethan clapped, proud. "That is it, Sophie. You did it." She beamed at him, and for a fleeting second, he saw his own lost daughter in her smile. Later, as Ethan packed up, Alexander entered the room. "Mr. Miller," he said, voice low but steady, "your methods seem unorthodox, yet they work. I owe you my daughter's laughter." Ethan shrugged lightly. "You do not owe me anything, sir. Sometimes a little laughter does more than a dozen treatments." Alexander studied him, unsure how to reply. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him, without formality or fear. Over the next few days, the bond between the two families deepened. Ethan began repairing small things around the hospital for free: a squeaky door, a broken coffee machine. Liam followed Sophie everywhere, pushing her wheelchair through the garden while telling stories about superheroes and dragons. The hospital staff began calling them the Little Sunshine Team, but deep inside, Ethan carried his own worries. Bills were piling up at home, and the repair shop was barely surviving. He wondered how long he could keep working at the hospital without losing everything else. Yet each time he saw Sophie's determination, he decided to stay a little longer. One evening, when the therapy room was empty, Sophie wheeled herself toward the window and looked at the city lights. "Mr. Ethan," she asked softly, "do you think I will ever walk again?" Ethan crouched beside her, choosing his words carefully. "I think your legs remember how. They just need to trust you again. And I think one day, when you are ready, they will." She smiled faintly. "Then I will make a promise. When I walk again, I will run with the wind. You and Liam will come with me." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "We will be there," he said. "That is a promise." Outside the therapy room, Alexander had been standing silently in the doorway. He heard every word. His eyes softened, but his heart also ached. That mechanic had reached a place inside Sophie he no longer could. That night, Alexander could not sleep. He looked at the old video of Sophie running through their garden before the accident. Her laughter filled the room. He pressed his hand to his face and whispered, "I am so sorry." The next morning, he arrived early at the hospital, standing by the window as Sophie and Ethan worked together. She managed to balance on her braces for almost 5 seconds before falling back into her chair, laughing. Ethan caught her gently, steadying her shoulders. Their smiles were bright and real. And in that moment, something inside Alexander cracked open. For the first time, he felt not just hope, but the faint, unfamiliar warmth of forgiveness beginning to take root. The days that followed felt like spring finally arriving after a long winter. Sophie's therapy sessions had become the highlight of every morning at St. Mary's Hospital. The nurses often paused outside the door just to listen. Inside, laughter replaced the sterile hum of machines. Ethan had brought in a small speaker so Sophie could move her arms to the rhythm of old songs. Liam cheered from the corner, counting out loud as she lifted her legs one at a time. Every inch of progress was celebrated like a victory. Dr. Harris kept quiet notes, amazed by the emotional change that no prescription could create. One afternoon, Alexander entered quietly and leaned against the doorframe. He watched as Ethan encouraged his daughter to take another step with the support of her braces. Sophie was sweating, trembling, but smiling through it. "Come on, you got this," Ethan said, his tone gentle but firm. "One more, just one." When she finally managed to stand for a full 10 seconds, the entire room erupted in applause. Sophie's cheeks flushed with pride. She turned toward her father and said, "Dad, did you see that?" Alexander nodded, unable to speak. It was the first time he had seen his daughter look like herself again, alive, fearless, and hopeful. Later that evening, Alexander invited Ethan to stay for dinner at his private suite in the hospital's residential wing. The table was large, covered with simple home-cooked food. It was the first time Alexander had shared a meal with anyone outside business since his wife's passing. Over dinner, Ethan spoke about the repair shop, the long nights, and raising Liam alone after his wife's illness. Alexander listened, quietly surprised by how natural the conversation felt. There were no titles, no pretenses, just two fathers who had both lost something they loved. After dessert, Sophie asked if they could all watch the stars from the rooftop terrace. The three of them, plus Liam, went up together. The night was cool and clear. Sophie leaned against the arm of her wheelchair, gazing up at the sky. "Mom used to say stars are like wishes that never give up," she whispered. Ethan placed his jacket over her shoulders to keep her warm. Alexander stood beside them, his eyes softening. For the first time in 2 years, he felt like he was part of a family again. The quiet between them was not painful anymore. It was peaceful. When the clock struck 9, Liam had fallen asleep on the bench, his head resting against Ethan's arm. Sophie's eyes were half closed, the paper windmill resting in her lap. Alexander looked at Ethan and said quietly, "You have given her something I could not." Ethan shook his head. "You gave her everything else. She just needed to see you smile again." Alexander exhaled slowly. "Maybe it is time I try." As they watched the stars, a faint breeze turned the windmill in Sophie's hands. It spun gently, reflecting the rooftop lights' small, glowing circles of hope. Neither man said another word, but both knew something unspoken had shifted. For Sophie, the night sky was full of dreams waiting to be chased. For her father and the man beside him, it was the fragile beginning of forgiveness and friendship that might one day become something deeper. And as the wind whispered through the rooftop garden, St. Mary's Hospital did not feel like a place of pain anymore. It felt like a place where hearts were learning to heal. The next morning, the rooftop memory still lingered in everyone's hearts. Sophie woke up earlier than usual, humming softly while her nurse adjusted her braces. She asked for her sketchbook and began to draw what she remembered from the night before the stars, the paper windmill, and 3 figures standing side by side. When Ethan and Liam arrived, she greeted them with a grin. "I drew us," she said proudly. "You, me, Dad, and the stars." Ethan smiled, touched by the simple picture. "That is beautiful, Sophie. You are getting stronger in every way." Their sessions became livelier. Music filled the therapy room as Sophie practiced standing longer, balancing with Ethan's steady hands, guiding her. Liam clapped and counted aloud, his small voice echoing through the hallways. Even the nurses began calling it the sunshine hour. Oh, Alexander started joining them more often, sometimes helping adjust Sophie's braces, other times just watching quietly. He still wore his expensive suits, but something about his face had softened. He began leaving his phone outside the room, no longer chained to constant calls. One afternoon, after a long therapy session, Sophie looked at Ethan and said, "I wish you and Liam could stay forever." Ethan chuckled gently. "We are not going anywhere, kiddo." "No." She nodded, then turned to her father. "Dad, when I walk again, I want both of them to be there." Alexander smiled faintly. "They will be," he promised. That night, Ethan returned home to find the lights in his repair shop flickering. Bills piled up on the counter, reminders of a life that never stopped demanding. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. For the first time, he wondered if his kindness might cost him everything he had left. At the same time, Alexander sat in his office reviewing reports for an upcoming hospital expansion. He paused, staring at a photo on his desk, Sophie laughing beside Ethan and Liam. For years, he had measured success in numbers and contracts. Now, all he could think about was the warmth of that smile. 2 men, from 2 different worlds, each carried their own fears. But neither knew that fate was preparing to test the fragile bond that had just begun to grow. Outside the hospital, thunder rolled softly in the distance, hinting that calm days were about to end. The following week began with gray skies and an uneasy tension that no one could quite name. Inside St. Mary's Hospital, things appeared normal, but beneath the calm surface, trouble was quietly forming. It started with a headline in the morning paper. Chief Executive Officer Alexander Cole exploits mechanic father for publicity stunt. The article included photos of Ethan and Liam beside Sophie, taken secretly during therapy sessions. It claimed that Alexander had hired a struggling single father and his son to create a false image of compassion for the hospital's investors. By noon, reporters gathered outside the main entrance. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. "Mr. Cole, is it true? Did you pay them to act? Who are the Millers? Are they part of a marketing campaign?" Alexander was blindsided. He demanded to know who leaked the information, but his board members only exchanged nervous glances. Ethan, meanwhile, was summoned to the administration office. The moment he walked in, the room fell silent. Alexander stood behind his desk, eyes cold and distant. "Did you sell this story?" Alexander's voice was low but sharp. Ethan froze. "What? No, sir. I would never—" "The photographs came from inside this hospital," Alexander interrupted. "Only a few people had access to that room." "Ugh." Ethan's voice broke with disbelief. "You think I would use your daughter for money, after everything we have done for her?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "I think sometimes people do desperate things for the ones they love." The words hit like a blade. Ethan's fists clenched. "I may not have your wealth, Mr. Cole, but I have my dignity. If you really believe that about me, then we have nothing more to say." "There?" Before Alexander could respond, Sophie wheeled into the room, her eyes wide with confusion. "Dad? Mr. Ethan? What is happening?" No one answered. Ethan forced a calm smile. "It is all right, sweetheart. Your dad and I just need some time." But Sophie could see the hurt in his eyes. "You promised you would not leave." He knelt beside her. "Sometimes grown-ups have to step away to protect what is right. But you keep working hard, okay?" When she reached out, he gently placed the paper windmill back into her hand. "This belongs to you now." Then he stood and left without another word. Sophie burst into tears. "Dad, stop him!" she cried. Alexander moved toward her, but before he could reach her, she tried to stand, her body trembling from anger and fear. "Ethan, please do not go!" she screamed, pushing herself upward. Her legs buckled. The next moment, a sharp cry filled the room as she collapsed onto the cold floor. Nurses rushed in. Alexander froze, his heart hammering. For one terrifying instant, he thought he had lost her all over again. Hours later, Sophie lay unconscious in her hospital bed, her hand still clutching the blue paper windmill. Dr. Harris said the fall caused no new fractures, but her condition was fragile. Alexander sat beside her, broken, guilt pressing down like iron. He whispered, "What have I done?" Across town, Ethan packed his tools in silence. Liam watched from the doorway, confused. "Dad, why are we leaving the hospital?" Ethan forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Because sometimes doing the right thing hurts. But I will fix it, son. I just do not know how yet." That night, rain poured over the city, washing the streets of St. Mary's clean, but not the weight of regret that hung over both men. In two different homes, a father and a friend sat awake, each realizing that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one they had brought upon themselves. 2 days passed, and the rain finally stopped, leaving the city washed in gray. Inside St. Mary's Hospital, Sophie's room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Alexander had barely slept. He sat by her bedside, his hands clasped tightly together, staring at the windmill that rested on her nightstand. Its blue paper edges had curled from use, but it still turned gently whenever the air conditioning blew. Dr. Harris entered quietly. "She will wake soon," he said. "Her vitals are stable. What she needs now is peace." Alexander nodded, but his face was pale. "Peace," he repeated. "I have not given her any." After the doctor left, Alexander's assistant brought him a sealed folder. "Sir, we traced the source of the leak." He opened it. The photographs and documents inside bore the signature of Richard Hale, the hospital's vice president and his late wife's half-brother. Richard had always envied Alexander's position and had been quietly pushing to take control of the hospital's expansion fund. The leak had been part of his plan to discredit Alexander and claim the board's support. A deep fury burned through Alexander, but beneath it was shame. His mistrust had cost him the only man who had truly cared for his daughter without an agenda. That evening, Alexander went to Ethan's small repair shop. The lights were off, the place quiet. Through the window, he saw Ethan hunched over a workbench, tightening a bolt, trying to focus on anything but the ache in his chest. Alexander stepped inside. Ethan looked up, startled. "Mr. Cole." Alexander's tone was heavy but sincere. "I came to say I was wrong." "Oh." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag but did not answer. "I found the man who framed you," Alexander continued. "It was Richard Hale. He wanted to destroy both of us, and I helped him by doubting you." Ethan's jaw clenched. That doubt almost destroyed Sophie's progress. She trusted both of us. Alexander nodded. "I know. That is why I am here. I need your help to expose him." Ethan hesitated. "Why me?" "Because you have something he does not," Alexander said softly. "Integrity. And because you care about Sophie, maybe more than I do." After a long pause, Ethan nodded. "What do you need me to do?" That night, the two men drove back to the hospital together. In the administrative wing, they entered the archive room, where Ethan used his mechanical tools to quietly remove the lock from the restricted file cabinet. Inside, they found printed bank records, emails, and contracts showing that Richard had diverted millions of dollars from the Foundation's charity wing into his own private accounts. As they photographed the evidence, footsteps echoed down the hall. Richard appeared at the door, his face twisting in anger. "I knew you could not stay away, Cole," he sneered. "You always have to play the hero." Alexander straightened. "You tried to destroy my hospital and used my daughter's name to do it." "Oh," Richard laughed coldly. "You destroyed yourself long ago. I just finished the job." Before he could move, Ethan stepped forward. "You are finished, Hale. The police already have copies of those records." For the first time, Richard's confidence faltered. Moments later, security arrived. Within the hour, Richard Hale was escorted out of the building in handcuffs, shouting threats that no one listened to. As dawn broke, Alexander stood beside Ethan in the hospital courtyard. "You saved my name," he said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "You saved your daughter. That is all that matters." Upstairs, Sophie stirred in her sleep. Her fingers brushed the paper windmill, and it began to spin again softly, steadily, as if it knew the storm had finally passed. The morning sun rose over St. Mary's Hospital, spilling soft gold light across the white walls. Inside, the stillness that had once felt heavy now carried a quiet sense of renewal. After 2 long days, Sophie finally opened her eyes. Her father was there, sitting at her bedside, his suit wrinkled, his eyes tired but full of relief. "Hey, sweetheart," Alexander whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "You scared me." Sophie blinked slowly, then smiled faintly. "Where is Mr. Ethan?" Alexander hesitated, emotion tightening his throat. "He will be here soon." Dr. Harris entered, smiling as he checked the monitors. "Our little fighter is back," he said softly. "She just needs rest." Then he looked at Alexander with a hint of approval. "You look different, Mr. Cole. Maybe you finally learned that healing is not something money can buy." Alexander nodded. "I am learning every day." That afternoon, Ethan and Liam arrived quietly with a bouquet of daisies and a new blue windmill made of sturdier plastic. When Sophie saw them, her eyes filled with tears. "You came back." Ethan smiled gently. "I told you I would." The reunion was warm and tender. Liam rushed to hug Sophie, whispering, "We missed you so much." She giggled, still weak but glowing with happiness. After the laughter settled, Alexander approached Ethan. "I owe you an apology," he said in front of everyone, "and a thank you that words cannot express. You did more for my daughter than any treatment ever could." Ethan shook his head. "She did it herself, sir. She just needed someone to believe in her." Dr. Harris clapped his hands softly. "Let us try something, shall we? Sophie, are you ready?" Ethan moved to her side, holding her hand for support. Sophie took a deep breath as the braces were secured around her legs. Slowly, with trembling strength, she pushed herself upright. The room went silent, except for the soft hum of machines. She stood unsteady but determined, her tiny fingers clutching the edge of the bed. Then she looked at Ethan and whispered, "I am doing it." Tears filled everyone's eyes. Liam cheered, and Dr. Harris whispered, "Miracle number 1." Alexander covered his face with his hands, overcome with emotion. "I almost took this away from her," he murmured. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "You gave her the chance to fight. That is what fathers do." Later that evening, as the hospital lights dimmed, Alexander walked through the pediatric wing. The laughter of children drifted through the halls. He stopped before an empty corridor where a new plaque had been placed on the wall. The Hope Rehabilitation Center. A place where hearts learn to stand again. His eyes glistened. It was Ethan's idea, and Alexander had approved it without hesitation. When he returned to Sophie's room, she was asleep, holding the new blue windmill against her chest. Ethan and Liam had quietly slipped out, leaving a small note on the table. It read, "Hope moves with those who keep trying. See you soon." Alexander smiled through his tears. For the first time in years, the hospital did not feel like a reminder of tragedy. It felt like a promise of new beginnings. And outside, under the glowing sign of St. Mary's, the wind carried the faint sound of spinning plastic blades, steady, strong, and alive with hope. 1 year later, the courtyard of St. Mary's Hospital was filled with sunlight, laughter, and music. The once quiet space had been transformed into a beautiful garden named the Hope Garden, built beside the new rehabilitation center. The flowers had just begun to bloom, and the air smelled of fresh grass and springtime. Children in wheelchairs rolled along the smooth pathways while nurses guided them gently. At the center of the garden stood a small stage decorated with paper windmills, each one painted by the patients. On a wooden plaque, the words gleamed proudly, "Founded by Alexander Cole and Ethan Miller, dedicated to every child who refuses to give up." Sophie stood near the stage, her braces hidden beneath a light blue dress. She leaned on her crutches, her posture straight, her smile bright. The crowd clapped softly as she took her first few steps across the garden path, each one careful and full of meaning. Ethan and Liam stood nearby, cheering with quiet pride. Dr. Harris wiped his glasses, smiling. "Our little miracle has become our biggest inspiration," he said. When Sophie reached the microphone, her voice was steady, though her eyes shone with tears. "1 year ago, I could not even stand. Today, I can walk. Thanks to my dad, Mr. Ethan, and everyone who believed that hope can move." She paused, looking at her father and her friend. "This garden is not just for me. It is for every child who thinks they are broken. You are not. You are just waiting to heal." The audience erupted in applause. Alexander stepped forward, his eyes misty. He embraced his daughter, whispering, "You make me proud every single day." Then he turned to Ethan and extended his hand. "You changed both our lives. I will never forget that." Ethan smiled. "You did the same for us, sir." Liam has learned that heroes do not wear capes, they fix engines and help little girls fly again. Liam giggled and handed Sophie a new windmill painted gold. "This one is for every wish that came true." She took it carefully and placed it in the soil beside the stage. The wind caught it immediately, spinning it fast under the sunlight. As the celebration ended, Alexander gathered the crowd's attention once more. "From today forward, every spring, we will celebrate Hope Day here at St. Mary's Hospital," he announced. "Because healing is not about how much we have, but how much we give." The crowd applauded again, their faces glowing with emotion. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan, Liam, Alexander, and Sophie sat together on a bench overlooking the garden. The air was calm, filled with the soft hum of crickets and the rhythmic turning of hundreds of windmills. Sophie leaned her head on her father's shoulder. "Dad, do you remember the day I sat alone at my birthday cake?" Alexander smiled gently. "I do." She looked at Ethan and Liam. And then they walked in. That was when everything changed. Ethan nodded. "Sometimes healing begins with something as simple as asking, 'Can we join you?'" Sophie smiled. "And I am glad you did." The camera of memory would fade there, the four of them surrounded by light, laughter, and spinning windmills. Because in the end, healing was never just about medicine. It was about love that stayed, kindness that returned, and hope that refused to die. And as the evening breeze danced through the Hope Garden, every windmill turned together, whispering softly into the golden light, "You are not alone anymore."